Peaceful morning in Texas. The sun rose gently over the sprawling suburbs of Dallas, casting a golden glow across the manicured lawns and neat driveways. Linda stood by the kitchen window, a steaming mug of coffee warming her hands as she watched the world slowly come to life outside. The faint hum of a pickup truck driving past, the chirping of blue jays perched on the backyard fence, and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog created a soundtrack that had become comfortingly familiar over the years. Inside the Miller household, mornings followed a comforting, almost ritualistic rhythm. Linda moved through the kitchen with effortless grace, flipping pancakes for her two children and pouring orange juice into their favorite cartoon-printed cups. The aroma of sizzling bacon filled the air as her husband, Tom, descended the staircase, adjusting his tie and scrolling through morning emails on his phone. For Linda, these early hours were sacred. The moment she kissed her children on the forehead before school, the laughter that echoed as they shared jokes over breakfast, and even the routine chaos of missing homework or mismatched shoes. She took pride in the small details. The neatly packed lunches with handwritten notes, the calendar on the fridge, carefully color-coded for each family member, and the homemade cookies ready for an after-school treat. Outside, the Texas sky stretched endlessly, promising another warm day. Linda took a quiet moment on the back porch, inhaling the scent of freshly mowed grass and feeling the promise of possibility. Her family was her world. She believed that as long as she gave her all, her dedication would be seen, her love reciprocated. In these tranquil mornings, there was hope and a sense of purpose. Linda felt, if only for a fleeting moment, that her efforts built the strong, loving foundation that held her family together. She savored the peace, unaware that beneath this serene surface, life was quietly shifting in ways she could not yet foresee. The quiet wife. Behind the gentle rituals of mourning, Linda's sense of belonging was quietly eroding. Being a stay-at-home mother in suburban Texas, she had built her life around her family's routines and needs. For over a decade, organizing carpools, volunteering at school bake sales, tending to every scraped knee and heartbreak. While outsiders often marveled at her seemingly perfect household, the reality within those walls was far more complicated and solitary. As the years slipped by, Linda began to notice subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, shifts in the way she was treated by her husband and his family. The respect she once felt slowly evaporated, replaced by indifference and, at times, open disregard. Her mother-in-law, who visited frequently, would offer backhanded compliments about her cooking or pointedly ask when Linda planned to do something more with her life. Family gatherings left Linda feeling invisible as conversations drifted around sales figures or real estate deals she knew little about, and her attempts to join in were met with polite dismissal or patronizing smiles. Even Tom, once her biggest supporter, grew distant. Their conversations narrowed to practicalities, schedules, bills, the children's grades. He started coming home later, preoccupied with work or lost in his phone. Gone were the nights of long talks and shared dreams. In their place lingered silence and the unspoken agreement to simply move through each day as partners in routine, not in life. At night, lying awake next to a husband already asleep, Linda found herself questioning her worth. Was endless sacrifice enough to hold a family together, or had her years of devotion rendered her invisible? The sacrifices, the nights spent worrying over family finances, and the joy she took in small, unnoticed victories. None of these seemed to matter to anyone but herself. Yet, Even in loneliness, she clung to hope, telling herself that devotion would be recognized in time. In the quiet stretches of her days, Linda wondered how much of herself she had given away and whether she could ever reclaim it. The painful discovery, Linda's days became a symphony of repetition, each one blurring into the next. There were lunches to pack, appointments to track, endless laundry cycles, and always the underlying hum of loneliness. The subtle dismissiveness she felt from Tom and his family was like a persistent ache, ever present, but easy enough to ignore if she kept busy. And so she did. She filled her time with tasks and lists, poured her energy into her children's lives, and maintained the household with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. It was as if, by perfecting her home, she could ignore the cracks forming beneath its polished surface. But no amount of effort could fill the growing void between her and Tom. He became a ghostly presence in their home, there in body, but distant in every other sense. He'd slip into the house well after dinner was over, offering curt explanations about long meetings or urgent calls, often closing himself away in his home office for hours. When they did speak, it was almost always about the kids or the mortgage. The ease, the laughter, the private language they once shared were gone, replaced by silence and the low drone of the television in the background. Linda blamed herself at first. Maybe she had become dull, too absorbed in the minutiae of motherhood and homemaking. Perhaps she was no longer interesting, no longer someone Tom looked forward to seeing at the end of a long day. But then, she would see the smile he reserved for email notifications, or the energy he had for his phone calls, energy that never showed up for her. The realization stung, but Linda pressed on. She owed it to her children to keep the family together, at least until she understood whether this emptiness was permanent or merely a phase. The turning point came on a warm Thursday afternoon in late spring. Linda was tidying the living room, straightening the family photo frames on the mantel. The sharp, cheerful chatter of her children echoed from the backyard, and the gentle hum of the dishwasher filled the kitchen. Tom, having returned home unexpectedly early, was on a call in his home office, adjacent to the living room. Linda tried to respect his privacy, but her route to the laundry room always took her past the office door, which was cracked open just enough to allow voices to escape. She wasn't eavesdropping, not at first, but then she heard her own name, spoken in Tom's clipped, businesslike tone, a tone she'd never used with her. Her instinct was to move on, to give him the space he seemed to crave. But something in his voice stopped her short. She paused, one foot on the threshold, the smell of clean laundry clinging to her hands. Tom's words were cold, clinical. "All the paperwork is almost done," he was saying. Linda's heart thudded in her chest as she realized he was talking to his friend and business partner, Mike, not a client. "I just need to finalize the transfer next week. After that, everything will be under my name, and she won't have any claim. She's never worked a day outside the house, and my lawyer says Texas courts usually side with the one who looks more financially stable. It should be smooth, especially with the trust account set up, like you suggested. She has no idea." Linda's breath caught. For a moment, her world narrowed to the crack in the door and the words flooding through it. She pressed her palm to the wall, steadying herself against a vertigo born of shock and betrayal. After a pause, Mike's voice drifted through, casual and uncaring. "You're doing the right thing, man. Protect your assets. These days, you can't be too careful. Women'll take you for everything if you let them." Tom laughed, a sound Linda barely recognized. "Yeah, Linda won't fight it. She never pushes back. She barely asks questions anymore." Linda slumped to the floor, the wooden panels cool against her knees. Betrayal felt nothing like it did in stories. There was no dramatic music, no tears, just a cold, paralyzing emptiness. Her mind replayed his words over and over. Everything under my name. She'll have no claim. She never worked a day. In a flash, the countless unpaid hours she'd spent nurturing their children, supporting his career, creating the home he came back to every night, they all seemed to disappear, invalidated by a few sentences spoken with barely concealed contempt. She tried to steady her breathing. A million thoughts swirled through her head. What about the years she put her own dreams on hold to be available for school drop-offs and sick days? What about the times she managed the family through crises? Tom's layoff, their daughter's hospitalization, the year fire destroyed half their savings, and Linda scrimped and saved to carry them through on a single salary. Every act of devotion, every sacrifice felt hollow in the face of this calculated betrayal. The rest of the conversation faded into background noise. Linda heard only the rushing sound in her ears, the muffled stomping of her own heart. The man she regarded as her partner, the father of her children, was plotting not just to leave her, but to ensure she was left with nothing. She stood shakily, eyes wet but unblinking. The world outside continued its predictable rhythm. Children laughing, birds chirping, the sun slipping lower across the Texas sky. But Linda felt the ground beneath her shift. For the first time in years, the tidy comfort of her home seemed like a stranger, a carefully staged scene for a life that wasn't truly hers. That night, Linda said little at dinner, going through the motions with automatic efficiency. Tom chatted about a new client. The kids recounted their days. Linda smiled and nodded, stacking plates and folding napkins, silently observing her family as if seeing them for the first time from without. After everyone had gone to bed, Linda sat alone at the kitchen table. The overhead light cast a cold glow across the Formica countertops, where she had so often laid out birthday cakes and science fair projects. Now, it illuminated a legal pad and pen. She forced her hand to steady, scribbling out the details she remembered from Tom's call. Dates, names, terms like asset transfer and trust account. Her years of silent observation now became her greatest strength. Linda began to recall every odd financial conversation she'd overheard, every unexplained signature he'd asked her for, every document she'd filed without question. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Linda realized this wasn't the end of her story. The pain, as real and raw as it felt, was an awakening, a call to action she could not ignore. Sleep eluded her that night. Restless and heartbroken, she stared into the darkness, replaying fragments of Tom's betrayal over and over. But somewhere inside her, alongside the hurt, something new was growing, a quiet but undeniable ember of resolve. She would not let herself or her children be cast aside so easily. Linda did not know exactly what came next, but she knew one thing for certain. She would fight for the life and the dignity that she deserved. And as dawn began to creep along the horizon, Linda finally found sleep, holding tight to that tiny ember, knowing that tomorrow, everything would begin to change. Quiet action. The morning after Linda's painful discovery was drenched in an unreal calm. The house moved through its usual paces, kids brushing teeth, Tom scrolling through his phone at the kitchen table, the coffee brewing on autopilot. Yet everything had fundamentally changed. Linda watched her family as though from behind glass. Every movement, every sound felt stark, as if she were living in someone else's life. A chill had settled into her bones, But so too had a subtle steeliness she'd never known she possessed. No anger, only resolve. Linda didn't lash out. She did not confront Tom when she could have. The impulse to scream, to demand an explanation, was strong, but she suppressed it. Instead, she adopted a new way of seeing. Watchful, patient, deliberate. The strength she'd cultivated in over a decade of tending to her family's needs now became her quiet armor. For the first time, her energies would be spent not on others, but on herself and her children's future. That Sunday afternoon, while Tom took the kids to the park, something he rarely did, Linda seized the rare quiet. She opened the locked filing cabinet in the small home office, her hands trembling, but sure. She scanned files and photocopied tax returns, property deeds, retirement statements, and a thick folder containing both her and Tom's birth certificates, wills, and insurance policies. Some items made sense to her. Others would need an expert's eyes. She took photographs of Tom's recent bank statements and unfamiliar account numbers, making sure digital copies were saved discreetly onto a hidden USB drive. Every night after her family went to bed, Linda took out her yellow legal pad and wrote down everything she could remember. Dates Tom had been away, names of accounts he once mentioned, odd conversations about trusts and separating assets that she'd overheard at his family's dinner table. She cataloged the progression. When Tom first grew distant, when he opened that new email account, when she'd been asked to sign what he said was routine refinancing paperwork, choosing an advocate. There was more to do than merely gather evidence. Linda knew the stakes were too high for hesitation. She researched attorneys on her phone, careful to erase her search history, and read dozens of reviews for divorce and family law firms in Dallas. It struck her how many stories resembled her own. Women who'd given everything for their families, blindsided and cast aside. Each story strengthened her resolve. She settled on a reputable law firm helmed by a woman who had a reputation for being both compassionate and fierce in the courtroom. Late one night, Linda quietly sent an inquiry email from a new private account she created at the local library. She left her phone number and a request for a consult, making sure her calls would only ever go to voicemail when she couldn't answer safely. 2 days later, in the controlled chaos of lunchtime, she caught a quiet moment and listened to her messages in her locked car. The attorney's assistant, her voice efficient yet kind, set a confidential appointment. Linda called back immediately, her voice shaking with nerves and anticipation, consultation, and planning. Walking into the attorney's office on a Wednesday morning, Linda felt exposed and raw, like someone wearing new skin. But her lawyer, Ms. Roberts, did not see a victim. She saw a client ready to fight. They spoke for over 2 hours. Linda presented copies of all her evidence with methodical clarity, surprising even herself with the thoroughness of her record-keeping. Ms. Roberts asked careful questions. Had Tom ever coerced her to sign documents she didn't fully understand? Did he have access to joint credit cards she didn't use? What recurring deposits or withdrawals stood out in his bank activity? Linda found herself emboldened by the process, her pain channeled into a kind of productive determination she hadn't felt in years. For every small humiliation and slight, she gathered a concrete fact. For every year she'd set aside her own ambitions, she now claimed a legal right. Together, they developed a plan. Do not confront Tom until all evidence was secured and legal filings were initiated. Continue to gather records, emails, electronic statements, even notes on household contributions. Maintain the appearance of normalcy at home, so Tom would not suspect a thing. A world in two halves. The next weeks were surreal, each day split into two realities. By daylight, Linda maintained her careful routine, packing school lunches, managing errand lists, exchanging pleasantries with Tom. By night, she transformed into someone methodical and analytical, drafting timelines of marriage milestones. Recalling each moment she contributed to the household, quantifying every sacrifice into something tangible for the court. She reached out to trusted friends, not for sympathy, but for affidavits affirming her role as full-time caregiver, her contributions to the PTA, her years managing the family's daily life, while Tom climbed the corporate ladder. Some friends were shocked, others quietly supportive, but all agreed to help however they could. Linda also scoured her own memories for omissions that might weaken her case. Had she kept copies of receipts for purchases made in her name? Did she have records of cash withdrawals for household expenses? She began photographing the children's bedrooms, trophies earned, photos of family gatherings, proof, albeit subtle, that her life revolved around her family's well-being. Mentally preparing for battle. There were moments of fear. Late at night or during the rare times Tom smiled at her with a trace of his old warmth. For a split second, she wondered if she should ignore everything and simply let it pass. But then the memory of his voice, cold, dismissive, "She's never worked a day," came back sharply, renewing her focus. Linda began to practice introducing herself differently, even if only in the mirror. "I've been a full-time homemaker for 14 years, she said, steadying her voice. "Everything I've done was for this family, and it matters." Transformation from within. As the weeks passed, the woman who had once felt invisible discovered that silence, when coupled with resolve, could be a formidable weapon. Linda's shy determination grew each day. She began sleeping more soundly, no longer haunted only by fear, but buoyed by purpose. Her reflection, once tired and dulled by routine, now held a glimmer of anticipation. In private, she read up on Texas divorce laws and custody precedents, arming herself with knowledge, determined that this time she would not be outmaneuvered by anyone. Waiting for the right moment. Finally, Linda and Ms. Roberts decided the time had come. The lawyer would file, serving Tom the divorce papers at work, where he could not react impulsively, and where his support network would not be there to sway the initial confrontation in his favor. Linda spent her last morning of secrecy at the same kitchen window where her journey had first begun, watching the changing Texas sky and sipping her coffee. Only now, she wasn't simply observing the world outside. She was preparing to reclaim her place in it. She had learned to harness silence, to turn observation into strategy. And as the clock ticked closer to the moment her true fight would begin, Linda knew with certainty that she was no longer just a quiet, forgotten wife. She was a woman in action, swift, steady, and utterly determined. The fiery showdown in court, the day of the divorce trial, dawned muggy and bright, the Texas sky heavy with both humidity and anticipation. Linda woke early, nerves singing through her veins. Every detail of her preparation over the past weeks replayed in her mind as she dressed, choosing a modest navy dress, tying her hair back neatly, and double-checking the thick folder of documents she would bring with her. As she looked at her own reflection, the nervousness was there, but so was something fiercer, resolve. She dropped the kids off at her friend's house, offering them reassuring smiles and promising a fun surprise when she returned. They saw nothing of the storm brewing in their mother's eyes. Linda would not allow her pain to mar their day. At the courthouse, she met Miss Roberts, her attorney, whose presence was comforting, yet steely. Together, they reviewed the evidence once more. Bank statements, emails, photographs, testimonies from friends, and a detailed account of Linda's day-to-day contributions to the family. Meanwhile, Tom arrived flanked by his own attorney, buttoned perfectly into a tailored suit. The look he gave Linda was practiced indifference, but the tightening of his jaw betrayed concern. Beside him, his parents offered Linda the same icy politeness they always had, determined to treat the upcoming proceedings as a mere formality. The courtroom, stage set for battle. Stepping into the courtroom, Linda felt the weight of her years as a homemaker, years routinely dismissed as doing nothing, shift into a kind of armor. This was no longer about winning or losing affection, but about demanding recognition for her sacrifices in the fair division of what she had helped build. Opening arguments came quickly. Tom's attorney was calm and confident, sketching a picture of her client as the sole breadwinner, the provider, and Linda as the dependent with little claim to the assets. Linda's pulse raced as the narrative contorted her life into a footnote. When Tom took the stand, he answered with a rehearsed blandness about his financial responsibilities and long hours at the office. He barely glanced in Linda's direction, but Ms. Roberts refused to let that story stand. When Linda's turn came, she stood, hands steady, despite how tightly she gripped her folder. Ms. Roberts' gentle but persistent questioning guided Linda to tell her story, not out of bitterness or spite, but with clarity and conviction. Linda described her daily routines, her complete responsibility for the children, and her management of the household during Tom's long absences. She spoke of the ways she had supported him through job loss, illness, and family crises, how she had kept the home afloat on one income, juggling bills, stretching every dollar, sometimes selling her own belongings to pay for emergencies. With every anecdote, Linda produced evidence, emails showing her communicating repeatedly with schools, doctors, utility companies, photos evidencing her cooking, repairing, and being present for the kids' life events, statements from friends and teachers praising her reliability and dedication, bank and credit statements directly debunking Tom's claims she contributed nothing. At several points, Tom's attorney tried to object, claiming irrelevance, but the judge, herself a mother, listened intently, often nodding as Linda detailed the invisible labor sustaining a household. The turning point, exposing the betrayal. Then came the matter of Tom's secret maneuvers. Ms. Roberts introduced the evidence Linda had gathered in secret, irrefutable proof of Tom's attempt to funnel marital assets into trust accounts beyond Linda's reach and transfer property into his name alone. The judge's demeanor changed noticeably. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney frowned, whispering urgently. Linda watched the judge's pen scrape across her notepad as Ms. Roberts read aloud Tom's own words, recorded in emails and referenced in witness statements. "She's never worked a day," Tom had written. "She won't fight back." The courtroom fell silent as Linda's dignity stood clear amid the condescension. Ms. Roberts made closing arguments with a passion that echoed the quiet sacrifices women like Linda made daily. "The law is clear," she argued. "Marriage is an economic partnership, and no partner's contribution is invisible. The mother who holds every detail of her family's life together is every bit as integral as the one who earns a salary. My client seeks only what is right and fair, a share in what she helped create, nothing more, and certainly nothing less." The judge took a long pause before speaking. Her verdict was decisive. She recognized Linda's years of unpaid labor as irreplaceable contributions to the marriage. Texas law, she cited, ensured equitable, not just equal, division, and that included both financial and non-financial contributions. Tom's secret asset transfers were overturned. Marital property, including the house, savings accounts, and retirement funds, would be shared. Linda was awarded primary custody of the children, with child support and alimony, set to honor both her caretaking and her need to return to the workforce. Tom slumped in his chair, his expression stricken. His parents' faces tightened, and his attorney could only whisper words of cold comfort. But Linda did not gloat. Instead, she felt waves of relief, of validation, crash through her. The years that had been invisible, devalued, finally had a voice in the eyes of the law. Aftermath, quiet strength in victory. Outside the courthouse, the Texas sky remained stubbornly blue. Linda drew deep breaths, feeling, for the first time in years, her lungs truly fill. Ms. Roberts congratulated her and pressed a hand to Linda's shoulder. "You did this," she said quietly. "You took your life back." When Linda collected her children later that afternoon, she hugged them fiercely and told them everything would be okay. That night, as she tucked them into bed, there was laughter in their home, honest, unburdened laughter that had been missing for far too long. Linda knew the road ahead would not be easy. There were jobs to find, routines to learn anew, perhaps even moments where she might doubt herself. But the day in court had changed everything. Her value, ignored at kitchen tables, discounted at family gatherings, had been declared indisputable before the law. As dusk settled over her new, quieter home, Linda sat by the window, feeling the hush of freedom and self-respect settle around her. The fire of the courtroom still burned in her veins, but it was no longer the burn of anger or fear. It was an ember of dignity, steady, unshakable, all her own. Linda's awakening. For weeks after the trial, Linda existed in a haze, almost disbelieving that the years of invisibility and uncertainty had finally ended. She would wake up in the gentle stillness of early morning, listen to the familiar sounds of the Texas suburbs, birds chirping outside, the whir of the neighbors' sprinklers, the hum of distant traffic, and feel both lighter and more vulnerable than ever before. Freedom, she realized, carried its own quiet weight. At first, she moved through each day almost in a daze, functioning on autopilot. The legal battles were over, but practical matters now clamored for attention. Closing old joint accounts, setting up her own phone plan, registering the kids for school with her name as the sole guardian. Each small, grown-up errand demanded courage. Every form she signed alone felt like a silent declaration, I am no longer invisible. Gone was the neat predictability of her earlier routines. Mornings no longer revolved around making someone else's favorite breakfast or quietly ensuring Tom had a pressed shirt ready. Instead, the rhythm of the house changed. Less rigid, more spontaneous. Some mornings, Linda let herself linger over coffee. Seated on the porch in her robe, watching sunlight filter through the trees, letting herself dream without guilt or urgency. The calendar on the fridge, once color-coded for 4, slowly began reflecting her and her children's hopes and schedules alone. A quiet, steady transformation. As days passed, self-doubt would surface, especially at night when the house fell silent and the enormity of change settled onto her shoulders. Sometimes, Linda missed the security of routine, even if it had been stifling. There were anxious, sleepless nights where questions spiraled. Would the kids be okay? Could she manage on her own? Did she really have what it took to build a new life? But then, just as often, she experienced moments of revelation. The satisfaction of fixing a leaky faucet herself. The simple delight of laughter echoing in the kitchen without tension. The joy of rediscovering old hobbies. A sketchbook tucked away. A favorite novel started and finished at her leisure. For years, Linda had silenced her own interests, believing them less important than what the family needed. Now, each rediscovered pleasure felt like a personal victory. Her children noticed the changes too. At first, they tiptoed around her, worried about saying the wrong thing, anxious about all that was different. But as stability returned and Linda's own spirit brightened, they began to settle. She watched with pride as they adapted, her daughter becoming more outspoken, her son a little more independent. They saw in their mother a new kind of strength, not the quiet, self-sacrificing strength that went unnoticed, but one rooted in conviction and self-respect. Finding her voice. One of the most difficult parts of Linda's journey was learning to speak up. For years, she had accepted the background role, nodding along to her in-laws' opinions, deferring to Tom's decisions. Now, she had to become her family's sole advocate. It started small, correcting a billing error at the utility company, asking for clarification at the auto shop instead of nodding silently. But each act of assertion reinforced a new narrative. She was capable. Her voice mattered. At the recommendation of her attorney, Linda joined a local support group for women rebuilding after divorce. She was hesitant at first, nervous that her pain was either too unique or embarrassingly ordinary. But around the circle of women, some younger, some with stories eerily similar to her own, Linda found unexpected camaraderie. They laughed about awkward dating apps, shared tips on budgeting, and, most importantly, reminded each other that worth was not measured by a spouse's approval. Those meetings became sanctuaries where Linda could vent her worries and celebrate small wins without judgment. Slowly, she grew comfortable sharing her story. Sometimes, she was the one comforting a newcomer. Other times, the group's success stories fueled her own hope, a mindset reborn. Linda's sense of awakening wasn't just about adapting to practical realities or regaining her confidence. It was also spiritual and emotional. She grew deliberate about what she let into her mind and home. Each morning, she made time to write, sometimes journal entries, sometimes letters to her future self. The act of reflecting, of putting her feelings into words, became a healing ritual. She sought out books and podcasts about self-worth and new beginnings. She started exercising again, not out of obligation, but because it made her feel strong. She took her children on small adventures, weekend hikes, trips to local museums, afternoons at the park, so they could all savor the freedom and possibility that lay before them. Old friends who remembered the Linda who once laughed freely and dreamed big started reaching out, rebuilding those connections, sometimes over coffee, sometimes a quick phone chat, reminded Linda of the vibrant woman she had been before years of compromise dulled her shine. Occasionally, she caught herself in the mirror, smiling at nothing, recognizing a glimmer in her eyes she thought was lost, daring to dream again. The true awakening came with possibility. Linda realized she could now ask, "What do I want?" It was a question she hadn't dared entertain in years. With the settlement, she was able to take a breath, review her finances, and for the first time in forever, plan for herself. She enrolled in a community college course that she had once considered but put aside, Introduction to Interior Design. It terrified her, sitting in a room full of strangers, some half her age, but she found the subject exhilarating. She began to imagine a future with her own business, sketching floor plans late at night, doodling redesigns for friends as practice. Linda also learned to savor small independence, planning her own meals, picking her own movies, even setting her own bedtime. She relished the slow, personal rituals, a candle lit before bed, a long bath on Friday nights, music filling the house as she cooked alongside her laughing kids. The home, once a stage for someone else's ambitions, became a sanctuary where her own desires mattered. Embracing tomorrow, Linda's awakening was not a single, dramatic moment, but a gradual unfolding, a series of small, daily choices to honor herself, to believe in her right to happiness. Some days, she stumbled or wished for the certainty of her old life, but more often, she found pride in how far she had come. The legacy of her marriage was not bitterness, but resilience. She taught her children how to stand up for themselves, how to apologize and start again, and most importantly, how to cherish their own worth. When friends marveled at her transformation, Linda laughed, not dismissively, but with profound gratitude for the fire that wasn't extinguished, merely waiting to be reignited. As a golden sunset stretched across the Texas sky, Linda stood at the window, no longer the silent observer, but the architect of her own future. The painful journey had led here, to a place of peace, hope, and genuine awakening. And for the first time, Linda could say with certainty, "This is my life, and I am finally awake." The first steps toward a new life. With the finality of the courtroom and the weight of the past behind her, Linda faced the beginnings of her new life with a complex mix of relief, excitement, and fear. Each day presented unfamiliar challenges and opportunities, a series of firsts that demanded courage, humility, and hope, building an independent foundation. Linda's first order of business was practical survival. She set up her own bank account, applied for a modest credit card in her name, and met with a financial planner recommended by her attorney. The numbers still intimidated her, but she forced herself to learn how to create a budget, how to track bills, and plan for the unexpected. Where once Tom handled all financial matters, Linda now combed through every bill and statement. Wrestling accountability into her hands was frightening, but also exhilarating. For the first time, every decision, every mistake, and every small victory would be hers alone. Some of the changes were simple, but symbolic. She shopped for new bedsheets, linens, and some dishes that reflected only her personal taste. She rearranged furniture, swapped out family pictures for landscapes and art, and tacked up the kids' drawings on the fridge simply because they made her smile. In those gestures, her home slowly transformed, not just in decor, but in spirit. It felt less like a museum of old wounds and more like a sanctuary for new beginnings. Parenting as a single mother, nothing loomed larger than the task of guiding her children through this transition. They had survived the rupture and witnessed Linda's quiet strength in the face of heartbreak, but the wounds were slow to heal. Her daughter sometimes asked why certain traditions had faded, and her son occasionally made remarks about wishing things could go back. Linda listened to their pain without dismissing it. She found herself able to offer comfort she never thought possible. Not by pretending things were perfect, but by admitting she, too, often felt afraid and uncertain. Gradually, the three of them established their own routines. There were pasta nights while watching movies together, Saturday walks at the local park, arts and crafts on rainy afternoons, and Sunday, invention breakfasts, where everyone experimented with pancakes or eggs. Linda taught them simple life skills: how to make a grocery list, how to do laundry, how to fix a dripping faucet, even if it meant looking up YouTube tutorials on her phone. As the kids learned, so did Linda, and with every minor household disaster solved, their confidence as a family grew, rediscovering her identity. In the months following the divorce, Linda realized just how much of herself had been hidden, sidelined, or lost. The world was suddenly much wider than her family calendar and suburban block, free from the constant hum of Tom's needs and unspoken expectations. She had space to experiment and rediscover. She continued taking her interior design class at the community college, remaining the oldest student in the room, and often the most determined. She reveled in homework assignments that required her to create vision boards, sketch room layouts, or analyze color theory. Sometimes she doubted her abilities, feeling behind or out of place among younger classmates. But over time, her quiet maturity became a strength, and even her professor commented on the thoughtful, nuanced perspective she brought to her projects. Motivated by her progress, Linda set up a small workspace at home. She began experimenting with minor renovations, painting her bedroom a serene shade of blue, refitting cabinets, and reorganizing closets. Word spread among friends and neighbors. Soon, she received her first commission to help a friend redesign a nursery. The joy of collaborating, problem-solving, and creating something beautiful for someone else was energizing. She started drafting a website, brainstorming a business name, and sketching ideas for a part-time design service. Still piecemeal, but building toward something real, embracing community and friendship. One of Linda's biggest fears, post-divorce, was loneliness. For years, her social circle had revolved around Tom's relatives, school meetings, and a handful of neighborly acquaintances. Now, she forced herself out of her comfort zone. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, helped organize the school fair, and accepted invitations to coffee or dinner, even if awkwardness lingered. The women in her divorce support group became a lifeline, offering advice, laughter, and understanding. They met monthly for dinner, sometimes with children in tow, sometimes just as a group of survivors. There, in the warm glow of shared stories and mutual encouragement, Linda learned to trust her new friendships. Facing setbacks and moving forward, Linda's new life was not without setbacks. There were months when money ran uncomfortably tight, when a feverish child or a broken-down car threatened to upend her careful plans. There were nights when doubt crept in, and the ache of loneliness pressed against her heart. But each time, she reminded herself that these were moments, not definitions, of her new reality. She allowed herself to mourn what she had lost without wallowing in regret. She was gentle with her children when emotions flared and patient with herself as her business ideas developed more slowly than anticipated. She accepted that she could ask for help without shame, and that rebuilding was a process, not a finish line, nurturing hope and looking ahead. As the first anniversary of her divorce approached, Linda felt a quiet pride blooming inside her. She and her children had created new memories to fill the empty spaces. The house was brighter, laughter lingered longer, and even silence had softened into something peaceful. And for herself, Linda's sense of hope had turned from a fragile wish into an intention. She looked ahead and allowed herself to plan, to imagine expanding her design business, to dream about traveling with her children, and to consider dating again. Not out of need, but from a place of hard-won self-respect. Most importantly, she resolved to never again surrender her voice or set aside her dreams for the sake of someone else's comfort. Conclusion: the journey of becoming. The beginning of Linda's new life was not a single leap, but a steady progression of first steps. With each act, large or small, she proved to herself and to her children that they were capable, deserving, and strong. Her narrative was no longer one of quiet erasure, but of conscious creation. As she watched her kids head out the door one crisp autumn morning, backpacks on, waving goodbye, Linda smiled. The woman standing in the doorway was changed, not just by loss, but by her own tenacity and the promise of what lay ahead. In the tapestry of her new life, every stitch was a testament to courage, healing, and hope, woven patiently, day by day. Now, Linda was ready, not just to survive, but to truly live.